Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Good, whatever time of day it is, thank you for tuning in to Conversations with Dr. Don. The show is produced and broadcast from the Portland, Oregon, USA area. And for your first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of 1-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals and about whatever it is that we have decided to talk about. And Dr. Donahoe has been on the show a number of times in the past because he's got so much to say about such important things, and I like him. Okay. Dr. Donahoe, thank you for coming on the show.
Sure, and no one else will listen to me. So it's nice to be back.
You betcha. The title of our show this evening is You Are Being Watched: Privacy, Public Health, and Society. There's a lot in that, and we're going to cover every ounce of it. All right? Now, we're going to have an abbreviated bio section because since you've been on a number of times before and we have a lot of regular viewers, we won't talk about your total history and all that kind of stuff. We'll have some basic stuff and go on from there to cover all the stuff that we're going to talk about this evening. Also, all right, why don't you start and tell me how you're feeling right now?
Worried, scared. I think it's a very frightening time in the U.S. today, with much of the rhetoric that's coming out, particularly from the Republican candidates, about their thoughts on Muslims in the United States, about terrorism, about refugees. And I think about it in a historical context. So if you go back to the founding of the United States, it was founded by pilgrims and others who came from Europe who conducted what is arguably the most successful genocide in recorded history, which wiped out 99% of the Native Americans, largely through disease, but also through calculated warfare that took place over centuries. And fast forward, you have a country that was founded on the ideals where we were built on immigration. We developed into a multicultural society with all the benefits that come from that because of immigration.
Martin,
and yet,
can I call you Martin?
You may.
And you're going into the second half of the show.
Oh, I see. Okay, I thought you wanted to talk about this now.
How are you feeling right now? I'm feeling kind of nervous because...
I'm very nervous, but I can save my rant for later.
You do such a good job of ranting, of course, yeah. So talk a little about who you are personally, as much as you care to share.
Sure.
Allowing enough time for what we're going to talk about.
Yeah,
you're a physician.
I'm
a
physician, and I practice internal medicine part-time, and I teach occasionally. I lecture. I have a website, publichealthandsocialjustice.org, that has now about 150 open access PowerPoint slideshows on everything from women's health and reproductive rights to environmental health, food safety, universal health care, death, dying,
sleep?
Clinical medicine. Not much. And I update those periodically, a couple times a year. And they're all open access, meaning anyone can take and use any portion of them that they want with appropriate citation. And I had a book come out a couple years ago, Public Health and Social Justice, which is a reader that has about 2/3 my writing and 1/3 writings from others that I've admired on some of the same topics. So I keep pretty busy.
You sounds like you do, yeah. And what do you do in your spare time?
I'm very involved with my family, and I enjoy reading. I enjoy all different kinds of sports, and try to catch a nap when I can.
Yeah. I bet you need it fairly often.
Right.
What organizations do you belong to that are worth mentioning for the viewers so they get an idea where you're coming from when you talk about what we're going to talk about tonight?
I'm involved with Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility, which is the local affiliate of National PSR, which is the international affiliate of International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, which won the Nobel Peace Prize back in 1985. So I'm very active with them on environmental health and food safety issues and on their social justice committee nationally. I've done some work locally with Sierra Club and Greenpeace in trying to keep coal and oil trains out of the Pacific Northwest. I've done some work on GMOs and the health and environmental risks associated with those, scientific reviews for a number of scientific organizations, and working with Union of Concerned Scientists and Center for Food Safety and others.
I can't catch my breath just thinking about the amount of energy and work you're putting into all those things you're involved in. You must be a really conscientious worker for social justice and those kinds of things.
Well, and I enjoy it, and I'm lucky, and I have a rather privileged life in that I live in the U.S., where I have freedom to speak out on most things that I want to speak out on, despite my fears, and to have a job where I can work part-time and devote my other resources and energies to things that will hopefully make the planet a better place. And I guess I realize that I'm 52, so I realize that even if I live my expected, I think the calculations are something like 3.5 decades that I might have left with my general health. That's not long, and I have a lot that I want to do for future generations, and not a lot of time to do it.
How did you get to think and believe the way that you do and do what you're doing? Where'd you get that from? Your mom, your dad, or what?
Both, yeah. My parents are really my heroes, and they sacrificed so much to give my brothers and me the opportunities that we've had throughout our life. My brothers have influenced me greatly too, and they're incredibly smart and incredibly committed to their families and to the work that they do. And I think just being fortunate to have had some mentors, both in the classroom and the clinic, but also people whom I'll never meet, whose ideas have influenced me, and experiences that have shown me how lucky I am, how many privileges that I have. And with that many privileges, I think, comes an intense and great responsibility to try to make a world that's not run by ecocidal, homicidal maniacs.
There are a few out there?
There are some out there. So, yes.
So then, you mentioned before the cameras started that there was something new about what's going on currently that you were going to inject and start talking about instead of the list of things we agreed we were going to talk about.
Well, I think we were going to talk about at the end, but I was kind of leading up to the Syrian immigrant question.
Okay.
And we can save that if you want, or I can address that now.
Whatever you want.
Yeah, I think I was trying to provide some background about the role of immigration in the history of the United States. And yet there have been many times that we've turned away certain immigrant groups, the Italians, the Irish. We turned away a ship of those fleeing the Holocaust and sent them back to Europe, 9,000 individuals, of whom 4,000 died in the gas chambers and concentration camps.
This was in the 30s.
Right, and today we have placed extreme limits on the number of immigrants to our country from Muslim countries, particularly Syria. There are about 4.4 million Syrian refugees, and another 7+ million who are displaced in Syria itself. Most of the refugees are going to other Middle Eastern countries. About 10% are going to Europe, and the United States has said that we'll take 10,000. And we've let in...
Well, that's nothing.
That's nothing. And we've only let in 1,900 this year. 75% of them have been women and children. The vetting process for them to get into the United States involves many years, is very arduous. And yet the rhetoric about Muslim terrorism and radical Muslims contributing to violence in the United States is really overblown if you look at the actual statistics of who causes the great amount of violence, particularly things like mass shootings that occur in this country.
Sure. So
I can give you some statistics.
Yes.
So there have been 207 mass shootings in the United States this year. Mass shooting is defined as more than 3 victims. So the shooting at the abortion clinic, for instance, and I am sorry I slipped there because I used the right-wing rhetoric of abortion clinic, the shooting at the Planned Parenthood.
Planned Parenthood, yeah.
And really only about 3% of their services are pregnancy termination. The vast majority of it is things like pap smears, contraception, STD checking and testing and treatment. So the bombing at the shooting at the Planned Parenthood killed 3 individuals. That would not constitute a mass shooting. 4 or more is what constitutes a mass shooting. 2 of the mass shootings in the United States have been by Muslims. One, of course, the recent San Bernardino attack, and that was from 2 individuals who were radicalized by influence of ISIS. But we have to remember, ISIS no more represents Muslims than someone like Eric Rudolph, who also bombed a women's health clinic and was the Atlanta Olympic bomber and was a Christian, represents Christianity. Or the shooter Robert Deere at the Planned Parenthood in Colorado, who had crosses all over himself, his house, and was a self-professed Christian. He doesn't represent Christianity. And yet I think the rhetoric by people like Donald Trump, who is a narcissistic, egomaniacal, pompous, self-aggrandizing, ecocidal, homophobic, xenophobic, racist, war criminal in training.
And you're going to probably vote for him, huh? I can tell you love him.
Only if I have a stroke that takes out both of my frontal lobes. But some of the things he said are so ludicrous, and I just would like to bring this up.
Let me interrupt you for a second.
Yeah, sure.
I've heard the term radicalized. What does that mean? Those people who did the San Bernardino thing were radicalized. When a person is radicalized, how do they get radicalized? What does that mean, radicalized?
Well, it's often people who are looking for something, who might have real grievances. I think many in the Arab world have quite legitimate grievances about the U.S. intervention in Iraq, which was unnecessary. 19 of the 20 World Trade Center bombers were from Saudi Arabia, with whom we've maintained good relations this entire time.
So were they radicalized, these people from Saudi Arabia involved in the World Trade Center?
I think they were. Now, like I said, some of them have real grievances. Bombings of weddings, bombing of the Médecins Sans Frontières clinic, things that kill innocent civilians. And you can imagine if you're living in a country that's dirt poor to begin with, and you're having drones constantly flying over your head, and your family is taken out by a drone strike, and someone comes along that offers a philosophy that says this is what God would want, and it's a perversion of what real Islam is. But those who have perverted it, much as many people have perverted the concept of Christianity.
Do you know of any Americans who've been radicalized?
Myself?
Radicalized? Have you been radicalized?
I've been radicalized just in the sense that I've opened my mind to, through my training as a scientist, to follow the facts, to follow the data where they lead.
So people who are radical then are following the facts?
No. I think there's different kinds of radicalization.
That's what I'm looking for.
Right. I would say that I'm not radical in the sense that I would go kill anyone, nor would I try to incite violence. And really what Donald Trump is saying and doing, and many of the other candidates, is inciting violence. What Carly Fiorina did in terms of weaving out of whole cloth stories about what Planned Parenthood does that have no bearing in fact, to make up lies like that, which then encourages people who may have strong feelings about reproductive rights and may have easy access to firearms and maybe are mentally ill or unstable and have a grievance of some kind, will act. They often need that sort of spur to action. So I do blame that sort of rhetoric for what goes on.
So a radical doesn't necessarily have to do a violent act to be called a radical.
No, I think a radical is anyone who might be incredibly passionate about something, and how they display that passion can be done in a number of different ways. It can be done through peaceful means and through trying to convince others to follow a certain path, either through your rhetoric or your example, or it can be done through violence, which really in the long run does not work. It doesn't work, and it won't work.
So a radical does not have to be a violent person?
No, I don't think so at all.
Oh, okay.
No.
Why is it that these people are violent, these radicals, people have been radicalized and come back and do the San Bernardino shootings? How do they get radicalized?
Yeah, I don't know entirely. I think many of them, like I said, are lost, may not have strong family ties, are easily persuaded by someone who forcefully can argue something that to them seems to make sense, maybe because they haven't had the same educational opportunities that others have had. They may have some mental illness. They may have been treated badly in some way. They may have legitimate grievances too.
Treated badly in some way when their parents and their families have been destroyed by drones or by American...
Well, or they could simply be a product of a broken family or child abuse or neglect or something like that. There are many ways in which children can be treated badly, but something happens along the way and they basically become isolated from the rest of civilized society.
I think that what's happened along the way in this instance is most of the, if not all of the Muslim radicals who want to come here and attack Americans is because of what America has done to them families, their culture, and there's no hope for them where they in their countries of origin. So that's how they became radicalized, rather than those things you cited just now.
But the reality is that most acts of terrorism in the United States since 2001, since 9/11, have been carried out by white male Christians.
They're probably Muslim and don't even know it, huh?
I don't think so.
Let me stop being silly, because what you're talking about is serious.
There's not a lot of studies looking at this. There's an FBI database. There's a study out of the University of Maryland that in fact show that the percentage of terrorist acts and mass shootings, that there are more terrorist acts and mass shootings carried out by radicalized Jews than radicalized Muslims, if you correct for their numbers as a percent of the population. But I think there's a tremendous misunderstanding of what Islam is. A lot of Americans don't understand what Islam is. They get it from sources that, again, are promulgating misinformation. We fear things we don't understand. We all grew up celebrating Hanukkah with our Jewish friends if we happen to be Christian and so on. It's more familiar, so it's not as scary.
Do you appreciate what a real Muslim is?
I don't completely understand their religion, but having talked to some Muslims, having read a little bit about the background of the religion, I think that basically they stand for the same sorts of things that those in the Christian and Jewish religion who really truly follow the teachings of the basic texts, be they the Torah, the New Testament, the Quran, which is basically to treat others as you would like to be treated, and to spread the love of God, or if you're a Unitarian, to spread the love that you would like to have returned and that you talk to a higher power. But I just want to read for you. This is just 1 week after Trump called on American officials to ban all Muslims from entering the United States. 2 women leaving mosques in Tampa were shot at and stoned. A deli owner in New York was attacked by a man yelling, "I kill Muslims." A pig's head was thrown at the door of a mosque in Philadelphia. A teacher in Georgia asked an 8th grade student wearing a hijab if she was carrying a bomb in her backpack. A woman employed by the California Department of Corrections threw hot coffee and an umbrella at a group of Muslim men praying in a public park. "You have nothing," said the woman, "but hate." German school children spit on and stoned refugees in their class. I could go on and on and on and on. And of course, the firebombing of the mosque outside of San Bernardino. It makes me ashamed to call myself an American, because after a while, when you hear people come out and say, oh, mass shootings, these sort of acts against immigrants, this is not what America stands for, and you start hearing that so much, this is not what America is all about, this is what America is all about.
But what's the reality?
You start to think about, well, maybe
about
this is what America is all about. It's certainly not what the documents upon which our nation were founded say that we should be all about. And we need to return those ideals: liberty, equality, justice, that are enshrined in the words of the founding parents of our country. They didn't always follow them themselves, but they're there. and they set a benchmark for us, as do the words of the Quran, the words of the Bible, and other religious texts.
Are you religious?
I've evolved. I would say I'm religious/spiritual. I grew up Catholic.
I knew there was something else wrong with you. I grew up Catholic too.
Well,
remember that?
Yeah, and I actually got a wonderful education at Catholic school.
Sure.
And I think my thoughts have evolved. Now I feel most at home in the Unitarian Church because it's interdenominational, and I like the community. I like the passion for justice, the willingness of the church to get involved and be a force for good in the community. And the two things that I appreciate most are every time I go to service, the music is wonderful, and I leave feeling happier than when I arrived. And I always learn something from the readings, be they poems or the what we would call the homily at a Catholic Mass. So that's where I feel most at home now. But I would say I have many more questions than I have answers.
Uh-huh.
And I think if there is a God, then I think he, she, it would like us to ask questions. And if you believe that God created everything around us, then you would think that God would want us to discover as much as we can about that world and try to live with the other members of his creation in as much harmony as possible.
So is America living up to its what it claims it's about nowadays?
No.
How long ago did it stop doing that?
Well, I don't think it ever completely did.
Not completely, but how long
No,
ago did
it does periodically. You
direction?
have moments of bright, shining light. The civil rights movement,
Yes.
with the women's suffrage movement, but we need a paradigm shift in this country, and we need politicians. And nobody in their right mind would want to run for office today. But
What do you mean by? Sometimes I interrupt you more than I usually do.
No.
Because you go.
Well, I get on a roll.
And
so
I love it.
Thank
I
you.
love it.
Yeah, thank you.
But I forgot what I was going to say. So please continue on.
No, I think that's about. I do want to mention though one thing about we were talking about Planned Parenthood, and the FBI database of terrorism does not include terrorist acts against reproductive health clinics. And yet the purpose of those attacks are the purposes of terrorism, to instill fear in a community, in this case, half the citizens of the United States, as well as their children and male partners or female partners, but we already included females. Since 1977, in the US and Canada, there have been 80,000 acts of violence and or disruption at women's health clinics in the United States. This has included 11 murders, over 20 attempted murders, over 40 bombings, 650 bomb threats, 175 arsons, almost 200 assaults, 100 acid attacks, and almost 670 anthrax threats.
Why is that?
And many of those were even before the anthrax threats that fall on 9/11.
The American ideal of how we're supposed to behave as loving human beings doesn't seem to exist for those people who do those attacks.
But that's terrorism too. And why
Yes.
don't we call it when we see it? There's always a question of, well, was this shooting terrorism or not terrorism? I don't see on the news any mention of we're going to treat this Planned Parenthood shooting as an act of terrorism. But it's terrifying, and it must be terrifying to women who simply want to go in and get the free to discounted health care that they can get at Planned Parenthood, being it provision of birth control or condoms, or to check to see if they have a sexually transmitted disease, a pregnancy test, or to carry out their right in this country to terminate an unwanted pregnancy. And what I really wish I would see is a movement, and it can't come just from males, it has to come from women. I wish I was running an ad campaign for the pro-choice side, because I would have a massive media blitz of people who came out and said, I'm a minister and I had an abortion. I'm a scientist and I had an abortion. I'm an astronaut and I had an abortion. Telling their stories. basically humanizing this act, this choice, which is often an extremely difficult choice for someone to make. And yet, despite the rhetoric that says that there are adverse health consequences associated with terminating a pregnancy, both mentally and physically, none of that is true. Again, there are so many lies out in the world. It's almost like wading through muck to find the truth. And I guess that's one of the reasons, getting back to why I do what I do, is I kind of enjoy the process of wading through the muck, because like the old joke with the kid in the room full of horsemen, there's a pony in there somewhere. Yeah, and that pony has the key to our survival, I'd like to think. So
you're working to have things reverse in America, so that a paradigm shift. What kind of a paradigm shift are you talking about to have a better outcome for citizens in our country?
Well, one where men and women are treated equally, both financially, educationally, politically, legally. One where all races are treated equally and have equal rights before the law, and the criminal justice system is not prejudiced or biased against those of certain races. One where there's more economic equality, a society that's still marked by competition, which I think is good, but not where there's an egregious accumulation of wealth in the hands of very few, and the masses having little and having less and less over time. A world where you don't have to stay in a dead-end job to have health insurance, where everyone knows that they can be covered from cradle to grave for mental and physical illnesses and for long-term care, where we value our children and our elders. That's a start. And where we don't go around invading other countries, and we focus on making our own country better and welcoming those who come here, who want a better life, who want to work, who want to contribute to society. And the reason we do that is not just because it's what our country was built on, it's because it's the right thing to do.
So the paradigm that we're living under right now, the result is the things you're talking about now.
Well, when your country is cited by Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch for all sorts of offenses, and when world opinion holds you in such low esteem, and ranks you literally down with North Korea and China and Iran and other violators of human rights, you have to wonder why so many people think that about us. And I don't think it's because they're jealous of our freedoms, which is the usual
why do you think
rejoinder.
It is?
I think it's because of our foreign policy, both economic and military.
What's wrong with our foreign policy?
I think it's focused on maximizing profit for behemoth corporations.
But you're a capitalist, aren't you?
I don't think so. No, I'm not. What I am is it's complex.
Of course it is.
I would say I'm one who believes in democracy, which I don't think we have here. I believe in a truly democratic society in which there's competition, limited competition, and yet there's a distribution of resources so that everyone has the basics, everyone has the ability to get educated through graduate school for free, where
are you sure you're not a
job
socialist?
Security.
You sound like a socialist.
You know, the problem is I think it's that some of the socialist countries that I've seen, the communist countries, they devolve into rulers or into a leadership model that limits free speech to some degree.
Isn't that the same as what's going on in America today?
Well, right. And also that ends up being government by the few. So it might start with the right ideals. But unfortunately, the detritus rises to the top. It's much like tires in a landfill. No matter how deep you bury them, they keep heating up and going to the top, and you have to push them down further. And so
you're going to help us push those
tires
tires
down.
Get the tires
back down and release the whatever good is.
Part of the reason my grilling you is that I'm afraid that people are going to expect you and I to break into kumbaya any moment ago along the way, because we think alike in so many ways. I'm deeply concerned about social justice and those kinds of things.
Well, I have a terrible voice, so it's probably good if we don't break into Kumbaya.
Yeah.
But those are my concerns.
Well, let's take a break right now because it's about a half an hour, and then we'll resume when we come back. And where was that paper I gave you to? Let's take a break, Mr. E, can we, Mr. Director? We are back. Thanks for staying tuned. For you first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals. And Dr. Donahoe, Dr. Martin Donahoe, has been on the show a couple of times in the past, and I hope we still have fun before this evening's over, so he'll come back on again, because I'm so fascinated and charmed by his intellect and his passions and the things he's really concerned about. And I think we need more people like you to make our country be the country that it was supposed to be in the very beginning.
Thanks.
So let's pick up where we left off, sort of.
Yeah, I want to just read a quote. This is from somebody who understands what rhetoric can do to a populace. Of course the people don't want war, but it is the leaders of the country who determine the policy, and it is always a simple matter to drag the people along, whether it is a democracy or a fascist dictatorship or a parliament or a communist dictatorship. Voice or no voice, the people can always be brought to the bidding of the leaders. All you have to do is tell them they are being attacked and denounce the pacifists for lack of patriotism and exposing the country to danger. Hermann Goering at the Nuremberg trials.
Oh my gosh. So that's an example of the detritus rising to the surface and leading the people
Kind of what
along a
we've
selfish
seen
path.
recently. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And I had this paper I showed you before we started, and I wrote this not too long ago because I was tired of seeing the federal government reporting the status of the citizenry in terms of unemployment and income, and there's so very many other things that need to be reported to the citizenry, so we have an idea the status of the financial welfare of the citizens. Let me read this to you. It's kind of long. The federal government's monthly reporting of national employment/unemployment numbers is inadequate to provide a comprehensive picture of citizens' financial health. To remedy this, we need the federal government to provide the following additional information on a state-by-state as well as national basis to the citizenry at the same time as the federal government unemployment numbers are provided. I have A through F. First, we should provide the combined monthly income of both the employed and unemployed for the last 3 months. The combined monthly income of both the employed and unemployed for the last 3 months. Next, an authoritatively compiled estimate of a livable monthly income for each citizen. Next, the monthly income of the employed alone for the last 3 months. Next, the non-employment monthly income of the unemployed alone for the last 3 months. Next, the length of time that the unemployed have been unemployed by age group. And last, the length of time that the unemployed have been unemployed by race. If you look at all of these considerations, we have a complete picture of the financial health and wealth of the citizenry across the board, including those who are super rich and have more than enough money to live a decent, comfortable life. That's a radical socialist idea, and I love it.
I actually don't think it's all that radical. I think that's the kind of data we should be collecting.
Yeah, so we have a picture of what's going on, but the people in power don't want us to know the reality of what's going on. And then we can go at each other's throats and settle our differences that are created by the people who really run the show.
That's true.
So what you pick up by where we should go next in our discussion?
Well, I think we should talk a little bit about privacy.
Yes.
And we all value privacy. We value privacy in our communication.
It's long gone anymore.
Our bodies, in our homes. Justice Brandeis described privacy as the right to be left alone. And
that's simple words.
The right to privacy is enshrined in the UN Declaration of Human Rights, to which the U.S. is a signatory. It's not completely spelled out in the Constitution. We certainly have the right to practice whatever religion we want to freely assemble. There are other rights that came much later that involve privacy, right against unreasonable search and seizure, due process, equal protection before the law. But it really wasn't until the 1960s and 1970s, for instance, that interracial marriage was okayed by the Supreme Court, and the right of married and non-married couples to get contraceptives. So we still have a long way to go to protect privacy. And in preparing for today, I thought there were two areas that I wanted to focus on. One is privacy in healthcare, and the other is privacy in the business world and in the community at large. So with respect to healthcare, I can tell you that people are concerned about the privacy of their medical records. 1 in 6 patients in the United States either forgoes care, lies, switches providers, or pays cash in order to have something kept out of a medical record because they're concerned that their medical record might be hacked or somehow their privacy be violated. And in fact, between 2012 and 2013, 90% of healthcare organizations had their data compromised, their medical records compromised. And it's about 950 specific breaches involving at least 30 million patients, probably more, because smaller organizational breaches are not counted in those data.
Due to technology and the internet and those kinds of things?
Well, it can be breached in a number of different ways. People can breach their own healthcare information in a certain way because half of healthcare websites share data. And until recently, pharmaceutical companies would data mine, meaning they could get access to what prescriptions were being written by doctors for which particular patients. Now they can only data mine in certain places, in certain states, for what medications doctors are prescribing, but the patient identifiers are removed from that information.
Using the internet?
Just contacting the pharmacy even too. To get that information, because the goal is to then direct their marketing efforts towards physicians who are prescribing more of a competitor's drug. And that's big business to them. So there are certain ways that our privacy is also compromised in the exam room by the government itself. And two very important examples are laws that require women seeking an abortion to have an ultrasound prior to that abortion. So in 13 states today, if a woman wants to terminate a pregnancy, she has to have an ultrasound, and in many states has to listen to the fetal heartbeat. So essentially what you're doing is you're forcing medical providers to perform a not an indicated procedure on a patient who may have to pick up part of the cost of that. And in some states, they were even trying to force doctors to perform transvaginal ultrasounds on pregnant women seeking pregnancy termination. Now, unwanted penetration with any sort of object, being it the genitals or a stick or an ultrasound wand, is by definition rape. So these were laws that, while not put into practice, would have required doctors to commit rape and charge the patients themselves for having that rape performed, just so that they could basically terminate a pregnancy, which is their legal right.
What if the woman consented to the procedure? Would that be considered rape?
Well, I think if a woman wanted to have an ultrasound before pregnancy termination, it's not a necessary procedure. And I don't think you can just go to doctors and sort of act like medicine is a buffet and say, I'd like a CAT scan because I've got a headache and I have a cough, so I'd like a chest x-ray and I'm willing to pay for it, because that makes a mockery of evidence-based medicine. But if the woman was on the fence about keeping the pregnancy, there was concerns about the health of the fetus, the ultrasound was indicated, the woman requested it, it would help in her decision-making process, then by all means.
The woman requested it, that's the key. The woman requested it.
It's consent, it's all about consent. But there is subtle pressure in an exam room, even without such laws, for patients to consent, just because of the imbalances of the doctor-patient relationship. The other area in which the federal government has intervened is the area of gun safety and firearm ownership. Now, accidental gun shootings and even deliberate shootings, particularly which involve children, are a major problem, a major public health problem. The government stopped the CDC from doing any research to collect gun violence data for many years. And what they've done in Florida, and this is still held up in the 11th Circuit Court, but is they basically said doctors cannot discuss, as part of a pediatric visit to examine issues of safety in the home, electrical outlets, fences around pools, things like that, if there are guns in the home and if they're locked and unloaded. They're basically forbidden to practice medicine in a way that's consistent with the goals of public health being to reduce unnecessary death and injury among children. Indiana and Texas are also considering similar laws. And this, again, is an invasion into the exam room of the federal government, an intrusion into that very sacred relationship between a doctor and a patient, which is somewhat like a petitioner and a priest. We basically hold the information that we receive in extreme confidence, and the healthcare laws, like HIPAA, which you may have heard of, require us to treat healthcare data and patients' medical data as sacrosanct. There are only certain things you can violate privacy for, things like elder abuse, domestic violence, certain infectious diseases, FDA monitoring of drug delivery devices or medical devices and things like that. So get out of my exam room and get out of my special relationship with my patients.
So privacy has gone by the wayside in that situation.
Absolutely, yeah. It's an unnecessary, unwarranted, and patently illegal intrusion into the exam room and into the privacy of patients' lives to do that.
What would you do to address that problem?
Well, it's being handled in the courts today. The major medical organizations, of course, have come out against the Florida law. I think, again, part of this is public education, too, regarding firearm safety, regarding our country is so far beyond any other developed country in terms of gun violence, and that's a topic for a whole other program.
How to?
But I think the bottom line here is that you have to do all you can to safeguard your healthcare data. Don't put it out on the internet to healthcare sites who are asking you to submit profiles that are basically for their marketing purposes or to sell you nutraceuticals or things like that. And
I think the genie's out of the bottle as far as privacy is concerned.
Well,
I really think so.
It's
like nothing else.
I think kids growing up today have a very different set of what's normal with respect to privacy than we did, and it's difficult to try to explain that to them of what it used to be like, because it's
a real stretch for them to appreciate what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's so different. It's another world.
Now, time is running out, so what else are we going to talk about?
Well, I thought I might talk about other issues of privacy more in the workplace and in public.
Sure.
Employers collect a lot of data. About half of Fortune 500 companies collect information on applicants and on employees, do things like read email, listen to voicemail, keystroke analysis, sites on the internet that you're visiting. A third run credit checks on potential employees. Before the HIPAA privacy law for healthcare, a third would examine medical records when they could.
What HIPAA means.
What's that?
HIPAA, what does that mean?
HIPAA, Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. Right, it's basically the Privacy Act. Some companies actually have done DNA analysis and urine pregnancy testing because they don't want to hire someone who's pregnant, or they want to find out if someone has a gene for something like Huntington's disease that they're going to come down with in their 40s and eat up a lot of healthcare costs over time. A lot of companies will use polygraph testing, which is the so-called lie detector, which the National Academy of Sciences has said is a virtually useless way to catch people who are liars, and yet it's still used by the government, by local law enforcement agencies, by many businesses.
So we're beyond 1984, huh?
Yeah, Myers-Briggs personality testing, which has been debunked. There are some areas where one might argue invasions of privacy are helpful. Certainly, I'm happy to go through an airport screening. Much of it is sort of kabuki theater that doesn't really necessarily prevent terrorist attacks, but I think it's reasonable to have that sort of invasion of my privacy to board an aircraft. There are many who support police body cams. I think that's probably a good idea with certain restrictions and limitations. Traffic violation video recorders to catch people who are running red lights and speeding and things like that.
But to have all those things you're reciting one after the other, right, it makes the hackles on my neck rise. You know?
Right, and the number of video cameras that are just placed around cities like New York and London and elsewhere in the millions. You basically can't walk anywhere in New York or London or many other major cities without being captured on a video camera of some kind. And the question is, who's doing the watching? And who's watching the watchers, and even who's watching the watchers at airport security. So when they used to have the scanners that would basically reveal your body underneath your clothing, and you could look at things like the breast shape and the nipples and so on, they would catch a number of the TSA agents who were basically, they're just sort of ogling women and not looking for terrorists. Now, granted, the vast majority of TSA agents are there because they're committed to making our air travel safe. But there are always some bad apples in the group. And then the major concern that I have also is the whole NSA spying and their links with the telecommunications companies to gather information on our phone calls, basically every citizen in the United States. Now that's been shut down to some degree. To what extent that's entirely believable, things still go through the FISA court, but the fact that our own government has conducted a massive spying operation on all of its citizens is very concerning to me.
I'm speechless because here you do a whole list of those things now that are illustrations of privacy going by the wayside. I'm afraid to do anything almost anymore. What do you think about drones being used by fellow citizens to observe you in your backyard nude sunbathing?
Yeah, we very much need legislation regarding the use of drones and regulation, and the FDA is now saying they're going to require registration of certain kinds and sizes of drones. The government is planning on having its own fleet of drones, about 20,000 by the year 2020. 500,000 Americans already own drones, private citizens, and drone sales are expected to be beyond that for this holiday season. There have been over 90 near misses with aircraft this year, and it's going to happen one day soon that a drone is going to hit a major jet and there's going to be a massive crash. And the fact that these drones can fly around and basically take pictures of people overhead, nude sunbathing or whatever it is they're doing is extremely concerning. Not to mention the fact that you put a drone in a terrorist's hand and weaponize it, what that might do. So
the drones that America is using all around the world nowadays, could they be considered terrorist weapons?
Oh, absolutely. On the other hand, there are some drones that are being used for very good purposes by environmental scientists and others who are looking at crop destruction and rainforest destruction and soil quality and things like that.
I'm thinking about drones in terms of the reasons that we have some radicalized Muslims who are interested in hurting America and Americans.
But I'd be careful. I would always do radicalized Muslims in parentheses, quotation marks, because they really don't represent Islam. So I'd say they're really, if you look at what ISIS is not a group of Muslims. ISIS is a massive criminal enterprise like the mob that basically finances itself through terrorism and gold and diamonds and other minerals, and through extortion and through robbery, and executes people who disagree with it or who cross it. They're more like a mafia-like criminal enterprise.
I was just thinking the word mafia again. Yeah, I wonder where they learned that model from and how to control and manage their affairs in the whole world.
Maybe they read The Godfather. I don't know. But I since we don't have time, the one other thing I wanted to hit is the notion of whistleblowers, because whistleblowers, it's tough being a whistleblower. Most are not successful. It takes a huge toll on your life, and those who blow the whistle on egregiously awful activities conducted by the U.S. government are made into pariahs. So may I read just a list of famous whistleblowers?
Sure.
We'll start with 1777, Samuel Shaw. He was the one who brought to light the torture of British officers by the Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Navy, and this led to the Continental Congress unanimously passing the first whistleblower protection law.
That was a long time ago.
That was. 1893, Edmund Morel blew the whistle on abuses by King Leopold in the Congo Free State. 1966, Peter Buxton, the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, where the government deliberately neglected to treat and yet continued to study African Americans who were infected with the syphilis bacterium. 1967, John White, who exposed President Johnson's lying about the Tonkin Gulf incident, which was used to justify the Vietnam War. 71, Daniel Ellsberg, the Pentagon Papers, lies about the Vietnam War. 1971, Vladimir Kukovsky, abuses of Soviet psychiatry, where Soviet citizens were locked up in prison camps in Siberia for disagreeing with the government and diagnosed with mental illnesses and being treated with antipsychotic drugs. I'll just mention a few more. Jeffrey Wigand in 1996, the Brown and Williamson tobacco documents. 2010, Chelsea, formerly Bradley Manning, U.S. Army abuses in Iraq and Afghanistan. That got him prison time. And of course, Edward Snowden, who brought to life the NSA's spying on U.S. citizens, is now in Russia, exiled perhaps permanently. These people who brought to light major abuses by our government are people that we should learn about in school and that should be considered national heroes for what they've done, because they basically tried to put the check on our government officials lying to us, causing death, causing environmental destruction, and literally getting away with murder.
Daniel Ellsberg, the Pentagon Papers, yeah.
And others.
So those are real heroes anymore. So you got about a minute or two more. What else you want to tell us about that's worth considering right now? We are being watched. Privacy, public health, and society.
Yeah, I think people need to consider what they can do to protect their own privacy. So some of this is quite obvious. Protect your passwords. Don't share them with anyone. Protect and don't give out your social security number or your phone number or even your zip code to anyone. You'll immediately become a target of marketing. Stop all direct mail to your home. So you can do that online. It's quite easy to do. Set up a Google alert for yourself, which basically tells you if any article has come out or somebody's trying to use your identity or has done something bad in your name, or there's someone with a similar name who's had something happen that might damage your credit rating or your credibility. If you're part of an activist group, a group that's working for social justice, be it labor unions, nursing home reform, childhood education, pacifism, environmental preservation, be careful to vet any new members, because companies will come in and they will try to use corporate espionage to infiltrate and to create dissent, to disrupt your activities, to spy on you, and basically to upset your mission for their own corporate ends. It's just be careful. You might have to resort to getting an attorney, but I think that if one is careful, one will still suffer security breaches. You'll have used a credit card at Target, or you'll become part of the massive breach that occurred with anyone who had applied for a job with any branch of the federal government. I got one of those in the mail just the other day. So, but I think we all need to band together and work to protect our rights, those rights enshrined in the Bill of Rights, and to bring America back to what it's supposed to be, and to, instead of spreading environmental destruction and war through the world, try to spread peace and goodwill. Then nobody's going to want to become radicalized against America. America will be the world's heroes.
How many lists of the federal government that you're on? Homeland Security and you're subversive, Martin.
There's a book I want to get into. It's 100 academics that are ruining America, and I didn't get in the first edition, so it's one of my life's goals is to get into it.
So it's time for us to close pretty quick before the director yells at me to put up some public service announcements. Yeah, you want to watch my shows on the web, Google Don Baham YouTube. There's hundreds of shows on that I've been on for about 15 years, all sorts of interviews of all sorts of interesting people. And I have to tell you about the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. Without the ACLU, our civil liberties would be in worse shape than they are right now, and they're really threatened nowadays with the way the government has been going for the past 20 or 30 years. And we've got to end corporate personhood. We've got to amend the Constitution so that we can say that corporations are not persons and money is not speech. To learn more about humanists and humanism, go to that website, www.americanhumanist.org. I'm a humanist, and you're a Unitarian. That's close to being a humanist, I will admit you. And the Alliance for Democracy is a great organization I belong to. It's a national organization. There's also a Portland chapter. You can go to those websites and learn more about the Alliance for Democracy and the work we're doing on political and social issues to do with social justice. I got to remind you about KFC, not Kentucky Fried Chicken, Dr. Don's KFC. Kind, friendly, and charitable. Be kind, be friendly, and be charitable to you too, Mike. And you too, Martin. And you too, viewer. Thanks again, and we'll be seeing you in the next show. Good night.